Pam Bondi leans forward, chin high, eyes flashing with the kind of certainty that's been built on years of never being challenged. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett sits still, unmoving, composed, but in that stillness, there's a storm brewing, the kind that doesn't shout, it waits. Then it happens. A pause. A single, slicing line from Crockett cuts through the noise. It's not loud, but it lands like thunder. Bondi blinks, her smirk falters. Around the room, heads turn. Some smile, others hold their breath. The cameras catch it all, the disbelief, the quiet humiliation, the dawning realization that something irreversible just shifted. Freeze. The frame tightens on Crockett's face, poised, unflinching, powerful. The narrator's voice drops. That was the moment the old rules stopped working. Rewind, the tension rewinds with it, voices rise again, the scene resets, but now we know where it's going. The audience can feel the collision coming. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about power, who owns it, who's earned it, and who's ready to take it back. Pam Bondi, the once untouchable, speaks with that polished blend of condescension and charm. She believes she's in control. Every word drips with the confidence of someone used to having the last word. But across from her, Crockett's silence speaks louder. It's not weakness, it's calculation. Outside this room, millions are watching, some live, some through clips that will soon flood timelines. They don't yet know they're witnessing a shift, a reclamation of space, voice, and truth. Then Crockett leans forward just slightly, her tone calm but cutting. The room stills again. Cameras zoom. Bondi's smile vanishes. And for one electrifying second, every viewer knows this is the line that will echo across America. The air is electric, unrelenting. And as the moment hangs suspended between disbelief and awe, a question rises unspoken. How did we get here? Because what comes next will silence more than just a voice. It will silence an entire illusion. But no one saw what was coming next. Hours earlier, the hearing room hummed with the sterile rhythm of politics, clicking pens, murmured staff chatter, the low whir of cameras preparing for another round of what everyone assumed would be routine theater. Pam Bondi entered first, gliding to her seat like someone who had already decided how the story would end. Her blazer immaculate, her notes color-coded, she wore the confidence of a woman who'd mastered the performance of power. She greeted the panel with that trademark smile, sharp, rehearsed, and slightly amused. The kind that says, I've done this before and I'll win again. Every gesture, every word seemed calculated for the highlight reel. She leaned back as she spoke, using her tone like a weapon wrapped in civility. It was elegance engineered for dominance. Then came Jasmine Crockett, walking in without spectacle, no entourage, no theatrics. Her energy was different, grounded, intentional, the kind of quiet that fills a room without saying a word. She reviewed her notes, adjusted her mic, and when she finally looked up, her eyes locked on Bondi's, calm, assessing, almost surgical. It wasn't a glare. It was the gaze of someone who listens before she strikes. The early exchanges were polite, procedural even. Bondi spoke with the polish of a practiced orator, spinning narratives, smiling as she interrupted. Crockett, on the other hand, spoke sparingly, letting Bondi's monologue stretch, rope meeting its own weight. There was a rhythm forming. Bondi's performance built on arrogance disguised as authority. Crockett's silence gathered gravity with every passing second. When Crockett finally spoke, her tone was measured, legal, deliberate. She asked questions that didn't just seek answers, they exposed contradictions. And in those measured beats, the audience began to sense it. The imbalance was shifting. Bondi didn't notice. She laughed off Crockett's precision as emotion. She leaned into the old habit, the one where talking louder meant winning. Let me explain something, she began, but the words carried the faint tremor of someone realizing control was slipping. Outside the hearing, clips of the exchange were already being clipped, shared, debated. Viewers noticed the difference, the smug interruptions, the side-eye glances, the way Crockett's calm presence made Bondi's confidence feel theatrical, brittle. What started as another political sparring match was quietly turning into a reckoning. Inside, Crockett listened. She had seen this energy before in classrooms, in courtrooms, in conversations where dignity had to armor itself against dismissal. Every smirk, every over-enunciated correction, it was all fuel. But she didn't show it. Instead, she adjusted her pen, nodded slowly, and waited for her turn. Bondi mistook the patience for passivity. She kept talking, each word a little sharper, each smile a little thinner. Her voice rose to fill the silence, unaware that silence was exactly where Crockett drew her strength. And so the trap set itself. Not through trickery, but through truth. Every time Bondi dismissed, Crockett documented. Every interruption revealed who feared whom. When Crockett finally leaned forward to speak, the room shifted. Something intangible but unmistakable, the balance of power recentering. Bondi didn't see it yet, but everyone else could feel it. This wasn't going to end the way she thought. Because in a world used to loudness winning, Jasmine Crockett's calm was a revolution. And in that calm, destiny was quietly sharpening its blade. But what Pam didn't realize, every condescending word was writing her own downfall. Pam Bondi's rise was never accidental. It was curated a masterclass in image control and media choreography. She had walked the marble halls of power like a woman who believed the story of America had already been written, and her signature was part of the script. The perfect smile, the crisp diction, the charm laced with certainty. Bondi had built her reputation not on listening, but on commanding. And for years, that worked. Her career began in courtrooms where confidence could masquerade as competence. She learned early that television cameras loved her, the blonde precision, the practiced outrage, the way her voice could shift from honey to steel mid-sentence. By the time she entered politics, she wasn't just an attorney, she was a brand. The networks called her polished. Her allies called her fearless. Her critics called her untouchable. But beneath the composure was a pattern, one so familiar it had become invisible. When challenged, Bondi didn't debate, she dominated. She talked over, talked through, talked around. Power wasn't something she defended, it was something she performed. She had perfected the art of dismissing others with a smile, of making disagreement look like ignorance. She'd done it for years on panels, on primetime interviews, even within her own party ranks. Her confidence, once mistaken for strength, had become armor against accountability. And each time she emerged unscathed, it reinforced a dangerous illusion. That volume could drown out truth. Cameras loved her for it. The polished rebukes, the camera-ready indignation, they made great clips, great sound bites, great theater. She became the person networks called when they wanted a fight that looked like fairness. She'd lean forward, tilt her head, and deliver lines rehearsed to sound spontaneous. But behind that glamour was something colder. Bondi had always known how to read a room, not to understand it, but to control it. She could sense the weakness in others, hesitation, and she fed on it. To her, restraint was weakness. Nuance was surrender. Every discussion was a stage, every opponent a prop. It worked until the room changed, until she sat across from someone who didn't perform, who didn't play her game. The cracks had started years before, though. There were the whispers, the investigations, the donor controversies, the uncomfortable interviews where her answers stumbled under the weight of their own contradictions. But she survived each storm with the same tactic: charm the camera, control the soundbite, cut off the question. She believed she could always out-talk the truth. In private, aides described her as brilliant and ruthless. But they also said she had one fatal flaw: she underestimated calm. She mistook silence for submission, humility for fear. It wasn't malice, it was habit, the reflex of someone who had never needed to fight for space. And so, in that hearing, when Jasmine Crockett sat quietly taking notes, Bondi thought she had the upper hand. The arrogance of power whispered in her ear, she's quiet because she's intimidated. But she was. Crockett was quiet because she was calculating. Bondi's voice filled the chamber that day like an echo that didn't know it was fatting. Every line rehearsed, every jab carefully delivered. She laughed mid-sentence, confident the crowd was hers. Yet beneath that laughter, something shifted. Her cadence, once commanding, began to sound strained. Her eyes darted toward Crockett, who hadn't yet spoken a word since Bondi's opening volley. And that silence, that poised, heavy silence, was the beginning of Bondi's unraveling. Because power, once accustomed to adoration, doesn't know how to process indifference. It thrives on reaction. When it doesn't get one, it turns inward. It implodes. Viewers watching from home could feel it. The balance was off. The woman who always controlled the narrative suddenly looked like someone trapped in one. Bondi didn't know it yet, but the moment she leaned too far into her own performance, she gave Crockett the stage. And when the world is watching, that stage can become a mirror. She built her career on volume, but this time silence would be her legacy. Every smirk, every overconfident interruption, every cutting remark, they weren't signs of control. They were signs of fear disguised as dominance. And across from her sat someone who had learned long ago that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It waits, it listens, it strikes when arrogance least expects it. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was leaning in, and as Bondi straightened her notes and smiled for the lens, the countdown had already begun. But on the other side of that table sat someone who had seen enough, and she wasn't backing down. Long before the cameras, before the glare of the spotlight or the viral clip that would circle the nation, Jasmine Crockett learned the art of composure in places where dignity wasn't given, it was demanded. She was raised in a world where silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Where every word a black woman spoke in a room that wasn't built for her had to be measured, sharpened, and wrapped in restraint. Her story doesn't begin with politics. It begins with grit, with long nights in classrooms where she was one of the few who dared to challenge professors who spoke over her, with courtrooms in Texas where she defended the voiceless, the overlooked, the underfunded clients who didn't have a team, a lobby, or a name. There, she learned that justice wasn't just argued, it was earned through endurance. Before she ever sat across from Pam Bondi, Crockett had faced 1,000 subtler versions of her. The patronizing smiles, the slow, exaggerated corrections, the looks that said, "You don't belong here." She had seen them all in law school, in courtrooms, in hallways where power measured worth in pedigree, not principle. And every time she chose not to react. Not because she couldn't, but because she knew that control, real control, came from owning the moment others tried to define for you. Crockett's fire wasn't born out of rage. It was born out of purpose. Raised in a working-class family that valued service over show, she grew up watching her community fight for recognition, for access, for fairness. She saw her elders speak truth in rooms that pretended not to hear. And so, she learned early that shouting is what makes people listen, its conviction. Her law career sharpened that instinct. She didn't just argue cases, she lived them. She stood up for clients who couldn't afford voices of their own. She defended protesters when justice was weaponized. She faced down judges who mistook firmness for aggression, and every time she met their condescension with composure. Not silence, but strategy. And that's the thing about Jasmine Crockett, she doesn't waste motion. Her calm isn't the absence of emotion. It's the discipline of someone who's been underestimated too long to give her opponents the satisfaction of reaction. So when Pam Bondi smirked across that table, interrupting with the polished confidence of privilege, Crockett wasn't rattled. She recognized it, the tone, the posture, the performance. She'd seen it before in countless rooms where women like her were expected to shrink. Only this time the cameras were rolling. This time the world was watching. And what millions would soon understand is that this wasn't just a debate. It was a generational echo. Every raised eyebrow, every dismissive tone from Bondi mirrored centuries of the same dismissal, repackaged in new suits and new slogans. But Crockett had studied that pattern her whole life, and she came prepared to end it. She sat through Bondi's speech with the calm of a veteran who knows the battle plan better than her opponent. She let her finish, let her talk herself into a corner, and behind those composed eyes was a memory of every courtroom where she'd been talked over, every newsroom where she'd been underestimated, every moment where composure was her only armor. Because that's what no one teaches you about strength. It's not loud. It's patient, it's forged in the waiting. When Crockett speaks, she doesn't just represent herself, she represents every daughter who watched her mother hold her head high in the face of disrespect. Every student who had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. Every young woman who learned that grace under pressure isn't weakness, it's power. Her confidence wasn't charisma, it was consequence. Years of discipline, years of standing her ground when it wasn't fashionable. She didn't learn to perform power. She learned to practice it quietly until it became second nature. And so, sitting in that hearing, Jasmine Crockett didn't see an enemy, she saw a pattern. She saw what happens when entitlement meets empathy, when privilege collides with preparation. She didn't need to raise her voice because the truth already spoke louder than Bondi's performance ever could. Outside, viewers would later say it looked effortless, as if Crockett had planned the takedown. But it wasn't performance. It was lived experience. The power to stay composed in the face of provocation is something you can't rehearse. You earn it by surviving spaces that never wanted you to thrive. When Bondi's words grew sharper, Crockett's focus only deepened. Every insult became a reminder of the battles she'd already won just by being there. She had built her career on precision, not performance, and in that moment, she was the embodiment of calm authority. She wasn't there to win a debate. She was there to defend a principle that dignity doesn't flinch, that truth doesn't tremble. And for a brief moment, as Bondi's voice faltered, Crockett's silence filled the room like thunder. Every camera caught it, every viewer felt it. Because this wasn't just political theater, it was vindication for every person who'd ever been told to stay in their place. And when the moment came, she didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard. The air inside the hearing room tightened, heavy with anticipation. Cameras blinked like restless eyes. Pam Bondi leaned forward, tapping her pen against the table with that familiar rhythm of impatience. She spent a career perfecting the art of dominance, fill the air, never leave silence unclaimed. So she interrupted again. "Let me just clarify," she began, her voice smooth but sharp, a tone meant to slice through composure. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from her notes. "I'll let you finish, Miss Bondi," she said, tone even, eyes calm. The kind of calm that disarms. The kind that doesn't need volume to command attention. Bondi smirked. "I am finished," she said, but the words sounded thinner than she meant them to. Crockett finally raised her gaze, meeting Bondi's eyes with a look that was surgical, steady, unblinking. "Then let's proceed." The back and forth began like a dance, uneven, volatile, riveting. Bondi launched her accusations, talking over every attempt at response. She gestured widely, confident that control came from motion. Crockett, motionless, waited. And when she spoke, her words landed with the clarity of glass breaking in a quiet room. "Respectfully," she began, "you've made several claims that don't align with the record." The word record hung there, a quiet reminder that facts don't care for theatrics. Bondi countered, voice rising. "You're twisting this." Crockett cut in, not with aggression but with precision. "I'm quoting you directly." A murmur rippled through the audience. One aide stifled a grin. Another reporter leaned forward, pen frozen mid-sentence. The rhythm of control was shifting, subtle but undeniable. Bondi's frustration flared. "Well, perhaps you misunderstood the context." "No," Crockett replied. "I understood perfectly. You said it on camera." The line hit like a hammer wrapped in silk. Calm, final. The kind of rebuttal that doesn't need punctuation. Silence becomes the period. Bondi's hands clenched. She tried again, louder now. Hopping volume could rescue credibility. But Crockett stayed unmoved. Her voice remained measured, unwavering, the cadence of someone who knows truth will eventually outlast noise. Every exchange painted the contrast sharper, Bondi's tone brittle with entitlement, Crockett's voice smooth as restraint forged from experience. The tension was cinematic. Viewers could feel it even through screens, chaos clawing at composure, and composure winning without breaking a sweat. A colleague nearby whispered, "She's losing it," as Bondi stumbled mid-sentence. She tried to redirect, to reclaim her footing with a new accusation, but each line unraveled faster than the last. Crockett simply waited, letting the silence expose what words could not. "Are you done?" she asked, finally, not a question, a verdict. Bondi's lips parted, then closed again. The room had turned. The press table scribbled furiously. A cameraman zoomed in on Crockett's face, that serene, unbothered expression that said more than a dozen retorts ever could. It was no longer about politics. It was about poise under pressure, about what happens when years of unchecked arrogance meet the immovable wall of discipline. Bondi kept speaking, but her voice now trembled at the edges. The authority she once wielded like a sword began to sound defensive, desperate. Meanwhile, Crockett's every reply was a scalpel, clean, exact, leaving nothing but truth behind. "You can distort opinion," she said, "but you can't rewrite evidence." Gasps fluttered across the room. A journalist's eyes widened behind their glasses. In that instant, everyone knew this was no longer a debate, it was a dissection. Bondi shifted in her seat, papers rustling like static. "You're making this personal," she snapped. Crockett smiled faintly. "No, ma'am, you did that when you underestimated me." That was the break, the unmasking. The split-second realization in Bondi's eyes she'd been outmatched not by aggression but by grace. The room was silent, waiting for her next move, but Bondi had none. Crockett simply leaned back, collected, unbothered, the embodiment of everything her opponent tried to perform. And in that silence, truth reclaimed the room. But then in just 5 minutes, everything changed. For a moment, it was pure silence, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that swallows a room whole. Pam Bondi sat back, papers trembling slightly beneath her fingertips, her smile faltering under the weight of the pause. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett finally began to speak. But she didn't rush, she didn't lean forward, she didn't raise her voice. Instead, she did what power never expects from the underestimated. She stayed calm. "Let's make this plain," Crockett began, her tone smooth, deliberate, steady. "You've spent the last 10 minutes mischaracterizing facts, misquoting documents, and misrepresenting the truth, and for what? Optics." Her words cut like a whisper of lightning. No shouting, no theatrics, just precision, the kind that leaves nowhere to hide. Bondi blinked, visibly unsettled. The control she'd gripped so tightly began to slip through her hands. Her jaw clenched, ready to interject, but Crockett continued, her cadence unbroken. "See, when you've built your entire argument on distortion, all it takes is one moment of clarity to unravel it." The audience stirred. Even the sound tech in the corner stopped adjusting cables. Cameras zoomed in. The tension in the air was thick enough to hum. Bondi forced a laugh, the nervous kind people make when their script begins to fall apart. "With all due respect." Crockett didn't let her finish. She didn't need to. "Respect," she said softly, "is earned through truth, not titles." That line hung in the air like a verdict. A staffer nearby whispered, "Oh my God." Bondi's expression hardened, but her voice trembled. "You're twisting my words." Crockett looked at her, unblinking. "Then let's untwist them. You said—" She flipped through her notes, fingers tracing the highlighted line. "That accountability was selective. That's not just inaccurate, it's dangerous. Because when people in power rewrite facts to suit their feelings, democracy stops being debate, it becomes theater." Bondi's lips parted, but no words came. Around them, heads began to turn. Even those who had walked in indifferent were now leaning forward, captivated. Crockett went on, her tone unwavering. "You can disagree with me all day, Ms. Bondi, but you don't get to distort the record. Not here, not today." The camera caught Bondi blinking too fast, the subtle flush creeping into her cheeks. The same woman who once commanded networks now looked cornered under her own spotlight. And Crockett, calm, composed, resolute, owned every inch of silence between them. This wasn't just argument, it was revelation. Because everyone watching, from the committee to the internet, recognized the deeper story unfolding. This wasn't about one debate. It was about every woman ever talked over, every professional dismissed for her tone, every person of color told to calm down when they were already calm. Jasmine Crockett had become their proxy, quiet power, standing toe-to-toe with privilege and refusing to blink first. Bondi shifted in her chair, tried to regain footing. "You're being emotional." Crockett tilted her head slightly, a slow smile curving at the edge of her lips. "No, ma'am, I'm being factual, but I can understand how that might sound emotional to someone not used to being challenged." The crowd exhaled. A muffled wow echoed from the back. The moment had shifted irreversibly. And then she landed it. The line. The one destined to ricochet across phones, headlines, and hashtags for days to come. "The truth," Crockett said, voice low but carrying, "doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to stand its ground." The room froze. Pam Bondi sat back, eyes darting downward. For the first time, she wasn't the one controlling the narrative, she was the subject of it. Crockett didn't gloat, she didn't smile. She simply placed her pen on the table, leaned back in her chair, and let the silence speak. Then came the reactions. Across the internet, the clip began to spread within minutes. Hashtags formed like sparks: Crockett clarity, truth overspin, #5 minutes of fire. Twitter erupted with disbelief and admiration. "This is how it's done," one post read. "Calm, controlled, devastating." On news networks, anchors replayed the clip in slow motion, highlighting the moment Bondi's composure fractured, the shift in the room's energy, the stillness in Crockett's eyes. Commentators called it a masterclass in controlled demolition. Even rival politicians, ones who rarely agreed on anything, shared the footage, acknowledging the precision of the takedown. "She didn't argue," one journalist said. "She educated." Meanwhile, Bondi's supporters scrambled. Some claimed she'd been ambushed. Others insisted the edit was unfair. But the truth was clear. No one had put those words in her mouth. Crockett had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection spoke for itself. Back in the hearing room, the applause was silent, but unmistakable, a collective exhale of respect. Even those who had disagreed with Crockett's politics couldn't deny the brilliance of her composure. She turned restraint into rebellion, precision into poetry. In less than 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument, she reframed the meaning of power itself. And as Bondi gathered her papers, avoiding the cameras that once adored her, Crockett remained still. No smirk, no victory pose, just that quiet, centered energy that said, this was never about me. It was about truth. Outside, the clip looped endlessly, the pause, the line, the silence afterward. Comment sections overflowed with words like finally, powerful, poetic justice. Young women shared it with captions like, this is what grace under fire looks like. For many, it wasn't just a political moment. It was personal vindication. The proof that dignity, when wielded with discipline, can silence even the loudest arrogance. And as the room slowly emptied, a reporter whispered, she didn't just win the debate, she changed the temperature of the room. It wasn't hyperbole. The energy had shifted not just inside those walls, but far beyond them. Across screens, across timelines, across conversations where people were suddenly talking less about politics and more about posture, principle, presence. Because what Jasmine Crockett had done wasn't a takedown, it was a cultural correction. She'd shown that truth doesn't need theatrics, it just needs a vessel strong enough to carry it without cracking. And as Bondi's words faded into irrelevance, Crockett's calm resolve echoed louder than any outburst could. The clip would live on dissected, remixed, celebrated. But in that moment, 5 minutes that felt like an era, the message was simple and seismic. Power built on arrogance collapses in the presence of composure. The hearing adjourned, cameras powered down, but for millions watching, the moment was still reverberating. Because something far bigger had happened, something unspoken, but undeniable. The old balance had broken, and the new one was already taking shape. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling was even more explosive. It took less than an hour for the clip to explode. By the time the committee adjourned, Jasmine Crockett's 5-minute dismantling of Pam Bondi had already migrated from news feeds to timelines, from television screens to TikTok loops. The hashtags began like sparks: Crockett clarity, 5 minutes of truth, when calm wins, and within hours, the whole internet was ablaze. Comment sections flooded with disbelief and delight. I've watched this 10 times, one user wrote. The way she stayed calm while dismantling Bondi's entire argument, that's art. Another tweeted, this isn't a debate, this is a cultural reset. Screens across the country flickered with the same moment: Crockett's steady gaze, Bondi's collapsing confidence, the silence that roared louder than any outburst could. Cable news picked it up first. Anchors replayed the clip in slow motion, narrating every second as if they were dissecting a championship game. Watch the eyes, one commentator said. Right there, that's when Bondi realizes she's lost control. Another analyst, smiling, added, you can't out-talk the truth, and Crockett proved it. By evening, late-night hosts had joined the chorus. One joked, Pam Bondi walked in with debate notes and left with a life lesson. Another simply replayed Crockett's closing line, the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, to a standing ovation from the studio audience. And then came the memes. Within hours, images of Bondi's stunned expression were captioned with everything from, when you realize calm is louder, to talked herself into defeat. Meanwhile, Crockett's image, cool, collected, hand resting lightly on her notes, became the internet's new symbol of composure. Someone edited it into a Renaissance painting, haloed in gold. Another user captioned it, Saint Jasmine of Self-Control. Celebrities weighed in next. Actors, athletes, activists, people with millions of followers shared the clip, each adding their own take. One wrote, this is what leadership looks like, truth without theatrics. Another said, she didn't just speak, she represented every woman who's ever been interrupted mid-sentence. Even politicians who rarely agreed on anything found common ground and admiration. One senator tweeted, we need more Jasmine Crockett's voices that remind us dignity and discipline still have a place in public life. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi's team scrambled to contain the fallout. Her spokesperson released a statement calling the exchange heated but professional. It didn't help. The phrase, heated but professional, instantly became ironic shorthand across social media, repeated with eye-roll emojis and sarcastic gifs. Bondi herself tried to appear on a morning show to clarify her comments, but the interview went sideways. The host played the clip mid-segment and simply asked, do you still stand by what you said? The look on Bondi's face told the audience everything. Crockett, on the other hand, didn't gloat. She didn't tweet victory or post clips. When asked for comment, she said, I just told the truth. That humility, that refusal to perform, only amplified her power. The restraint that defined her in the moment became her brand after it. Communities across the country picked up the theme. Teachers replayed the clip in classrooms to talk about composure under pressure. Young women posted videos imitating Crockett's calm tone under the hashtag #ChannelYourCrockett. Even corporate seminars started referencing the moment as a case study in emotional intelligence. The ripple effect was more than digital, it was psychological. Viewers saw themselves in her. Immigrants who'd been talked over in boardrooms, women of color who'd had their ideas repackaged by louder voices, young people told to be polite while others steamrolled them. For once, the quiet dignity won and the world noticed. It became more than a clip. It became language. Pulling a Crockett started trending slang for standing firm without raising your voice. And as it spread, so did a larger question. Why did this moment feel so revolutionary? Because it wasn't just about a debate. It was about reversal. For years, arrogance had been equated with strength, bluster with leadership. But Jasmine Crockett had flipped that narrative in 5 minutes flat. She shown that control wasn't the absence of emotion, it was mastery of it. That truth, when delivered with grace, carries more power than any headline-grabbing outburst. In barbershops and brunch tables, people replayed it, analyzing tone, timing, and subtext. In one viral thread, a commenter wrote, "She didn't just win the argument, she restored my faith that poise can still prevail in a shouting match world." And perhaps that was the real victory, not the applause, not the headlines, but the awakening that followed. People didn't just celebrate what she said. They started asking themselves how they could carry that same composure into their own battles. In living rooms, a grandmother showed her granddaughter the clip and whispered, "See, that's how we win with calm." In offices, coworkers shared it quietly after meetings where they'd been dismissed. In dorms, students quoted her line before debates. The ripple wasn't noise, it was resonance. Meanwhile, Bondi's legacy from that day had already hardened into meme material, a cautionary tale of how confidence without humility collapses under scrutiny. Her name trended, but not the way it once did. Not as the face of certainty, but as the echo of its downfall. Crockett didn't ask for the fame that followed. She didn't brand it, monetize it, or milk it. She simply continued her work, showing up, speaking truth, carrying herself with the same grace that started it all. And maybe that's why it stuck, because authenticity doesn't fade after the cameras turn off. The internet would move on, as it always does. New stories, new headlines, new debates. But that clip, that 5-minute exchange, would remain a touchstone for something deeper. Proof that restraint can be radical. That dignity, when wielded with purpose, can silence the noise. The hashtags would fade, the memes would recycle, but the moment had already transcended its medium. Because somewhere between chaos and calm, Jasmine Crockett reminded a nation what strength really looks like. But beneath the applause lay something deeper, a reminder of what leadership really means. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Jasmine Crockett didn't rush to celebrate. She didn't turn to the crowd for validation, didn't bask in applause or search for the moment on her phone. She simply gathered her papers, placed them neatly in her folder, and took a quiet breath. The storm had passed, and she had weathered it without ever raising her voice. Around her, the room still vibrated with what had just happened. Staffers whispered, journalists typed furiously, but Crockett remained still. Composure wasn't just her armor, it was her message. That in an age addicted to outrage, dignity could still disarm. That silence, when paired with integrity, could speak louder than chaos ever could. She didn't win the debate because she cornered her opponent. She won because she held her ground without losing her grace. That was the real mic drop, not the viral line, but the calm that followed it. In a culture obsessed with dominance, Crockett had chosen something rarer: discipline. She'd reminded everyone watching that true strength isn't found in how loud we can speak, but in how well we can listen and how firmly we can stand when the world tries to shake us. Her quiet victory echoed far beyond that room. Viewers replayed not just her words, but her stillness. The way she paused before responding. The way she refused to meet arrogance with aggression. In that restraint, people saw something they'd forgotten could exist in public life: humility without weakness, conviction without cruelty. Because what Crockett proved is timeless, truth doesn't need theatrics. It doesn't need to shout, exaggerate, or humiliate. It just needs someone brave enough to carry it with steadiness. And that steadiness, that moral calm, is what gave her the power to do what shouting never could: transform the tone of an entire conversation. Bondi's performance faded into noise, but Crockett's silence lingered. Not because it was empty, but because it was full of clarity, of purpose, of unspoken defiance. It was the kind of silence that says, I know who I am, and I don't need to prove it to you. In that moment, she embodied something larger than debate. She became a reminder of what leadership should feel like: grounded, gracious, and guided by truth. And that's why her moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't about partisanship or politics. It was about posture, about how a person carries themselves when the world tries to pull them down to its level. For those who watched from home, her composure became a mirror. It invited reflection not just on what she said, but on how we respond to our own conflicts. Do we meet disrespect with fury or with focus? Do we let arrogance dictate our energy, or do we, like Crockett, reclaim control through calm? The lesson was unmistakable. Dignity will always outlast noise. It doesn't trend as fast, but it endures longer. Because the truth, once spoken with integrity, doesn't expire, it echoes. Days later, Crockett was asked how she stayed so composed in the face of disrespect. She smiled softly and said, "When you know the truth is on your side, there's no need to shout." That's the legacy of her 5 minutes, not just a viral moment, but a moral one. Proof that restraint can be revolutionary. That real courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to bow. She didn't win because she shouted louder. She won because she refused to bow lower. And as the noise of the news cycle moved on, her example remained a quiet, steady light cutting through the static. Because in the end, the most radical act in a world addicted to outrage is staying composed, speaking truth, and walking away with your dignity intact. But the question now, will others rise with the same courage? Pam Bondi wasn't just silence that day, arrogance was. What you witnessed wasn't a debate, it was transformation. A shift in what power looks like, in how truth moves, in who gets to own the narrative. Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak for herself, she spoke for everyone who's ever been talked over, underestimated, or dismissed. In 5 minutes, she turned composure into revolution. She showed that calm isn't compliance, it's control. That truth, when delivered with discipline, can silence even the loudest deception. And in doing so, she reminded the world that the future doesn't belong to the loudest voices, it belongs to the clearest ones. This moment wasn't about politics. It was about principle, about reclaiming the space where dignity had been drowned out by arrogance and proving that integrity still wins when the lights are brightest. And now it's your turn. Because this story doesn't end here, it continues every time someone refuses to lower their standards just to match someone else's noise. Every time someone chooses composure over chaos. Every time you share, comment, or amplify voices that stand for truth. So if you believe calm strength speaks louder than chaos, share this story. If you believe in justice that doesn't need to shout, be part of this movement. And if you believe the truth still matters, subscribe and stay with us, because we're just getting started. Because in the end, arrogance may shout the loudest, but dignity always gets the last word. Pam Bondi silenced forever, not by noise, but by truth.